truth that you make.
Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. With me today is my co-host and guest, Janell Blue, and we're going to talk about methods of connecting with your European ancestors. And so, are you thinking of traveling to the country where your ancestors lived? Have you got a goal set? Is it just to be on the soil where they once walked, or are you really looking for researching them and finding specific information? And so Janell's going to share a couple of trips that she has done, and did one starting off like I did when I went to Scotland to try to find my ancestors, which I knew very little, so I went blind. I knew nothing other than that they lived in Glasgow and came from Glasgow when they came to Philadelphia in the mid-1880s. So, Janell, what are you going to tell us to do?
Well, we're going to travel to 4 different countries really today, and I want to start with an example that is similar to yours, except I had a little town, so it was much easier. Glasgow's a really big place.
City.
But before I get started, I want to share some advice, and that is, first of all, you need to know what country you're going to and how those records are kept there, because every country has a little different system, and some of that's based on their laws, their culture, the fact that there's a lot of war that destroyed stuff and so forth. So
and also change those borders.
Knowing
exactly where, particularly with Germany.
Yes, exactly. And so do as much of the research as you can with your immigrant in advance, because if you don't know the town or maybe the region, then you're going to have a little bit of trouble trying to nail what you're looking for. And there are plenty of places to get clues. Those church birth records, online now, there's a lot of those vital records that may give you a clue about where they were located, and that will at least get you into the region. And then once you're there, you may be able to find stuff. Identify what you want to know before you go. Get your genealogical question in mind, because you're going to want to focus on trying to answer that. You can't answer everything in even a week or 2 weeks.
And important to remember or to know before you go is, did they keep the type of records that you are seeking?
Yeah.
Because not everything that we kept in the United States was kept in different countries in Europe. So
right.
You may go there looking for some type of record, and they may never have kept those records. So
find somebody who's knowledgeable about the region or the country to guide you. And I learned a really good lesson. I guess I've always thought this, but and that is, find the local genealogical organization and join it. Communicate with them. And of course, they're going to want to deal with you a lot more if you're a member, right? So they have most of them have resources, and I'm going to tell you about one that that was the jackpot for me, was the local genealogical organization. Make sure that there's going to be somebody who can speak the language, because there's no point in going to the archives if you can't read anything. I mean, there is a point, because usually they will have an index on their computer that'll give you years or things like that, but you're not going to get very far without.
I would not want to go to Germany because I can't speak German.
No, but
unless I have somebody
right.
who can speak English.
Exactly. And then don't be shy. Ask for help. Ask anybody who looks like they might be able to help you. Be tenacious. Don't give up. Plan well in advance. allow enough time in the country, I think you're gonna, one of my examples was that I was sort of running out of, I didn't think it was gonna gel, so I wound up not narrowing the amount of time in the country, and that turned out where I could have used a lot more time. In advance, identify where those records might be and make sure that you know what's available and what the times are that they're open and so forth. And then just be prepared to take advantage, full advantage of everything that you are offered, because you'll be surprised. I guess I want to start with my first example, and this was really before I became a serious genealogist. And so I was kind of dabbling. I knew that this ancestor came from this town called Fallersleben, which was near Wolfsburg, which is sort of right on the border of when during the Cold War it would have been the westernmost part of the West Germany. And so the reason I knew about that was because somebody in the family had one of those family charts that were sort of a template, that had been filled in, and it went back pretty far. So I was sure that they were from Fallersleben because that's what it said. But I didn't do any other research. I didn't validate, corroborate. I just had this piece of paper. And so one time I was in Germany on business, and we were going from Munich to Berlin, and this happens to be along the way. So I decided to have an overnight stay in Fallersleben and just take my chances. Well, we arrived on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and I went into the little city center, the little town, and there was a museum, and I thought, I'm going to just go in there and see what happens. And there was hardly anybody in there. Now remember, Fallersleben it has 11,000 population. So it's a small place, and that actually turns out to be very advantageous to have something that small. So I went up to the lady at the counter and said, my ancestor was Louis Hillendahl. And I had gone online. Now this is, back in the mid-90s. I had gone online, and I don't know if you can still do this or not, but there was a telephone book. And so I looked to see how many Hillendahls were still in Fallersleben. And there were 2. So I told her that I think there might be a Hillendahl here, and I wondered if maybe, they were related. And the lady said, "Oh, Hillendahl, that's a name that I know. And in fact, there's Ulrich Hillendahl, who is an architect here, and he used to be the president of our society. Would you like to talk to him?" And so, she whips out her little Nokia phone and dials up, and the wife answers. She sort of gives a little background on what's happening, and she said, "Here, talk to them." And the lady was so kind and nice and said, "Please come for dinner." So here we were, we had like an hour to go to the hotel, check in, change clothes, buy a flower, and go to this total stranger's house for dinner. And it was fabulous. And the one thing that I did have was a family tree that I had made on, Family Tree Maker back in the day. So I didn't have much more than what we had, what we knew from the U.S. But it was terrific. Now, when you think about, I wasn't prepared. I didn't have questions ready to ask. All the questions I would love to be able to ask that person now. And of course, he was pretty elderly then, so it's probably. And then I was busy. I had a life, lots of things going on. I was working. So we followed up a little bit, but didn't really get to take advantage of that wonderful opportunity. So that's kind of my guess is that that's an experience that is once in a lifetime, where you can just walk into a city and just suddenly find somebody that you're related to. The next example is a little more well thought out, and that was my husband had discovered after his parents were dead that he had a Finnish grandmother, and he really didn't know her very well, but it was a death certificate that he looked at and said, wait a minute, this is Finland, what's this? He didn't know that. So he decided he would look into it, and her last name was Risala, that was the name that he knew, and he couldn't find anything on her. So Mike used resources. He went to the Institute of Migration in Finland. Now, every country's not going to have an organization like this. And Finland, their population right now is somewhere between 5 and 6 million people. So that's different than a country with 300 million. But they were somebody who took an interest. And because he was knowledgeable, because Mike had gotten a hold of somebody who was really knowledgeable, he said, I think that name is Rislakius. And she had shortened it.
Yeah, often our ancestors did that. They wanted to assimilate, and so they would change their name, shorten it.
Yeah.
And that can be a real problem with trying to go back to the native countries.
But it's also an idea of, take that root name and then expand it a little bit because it's possible. Well, so in that case, Mike said, well, where did they live? And he said, well, I think they were from this part of Finland. And then Mike said, is there anyone still living there with that name? Well, yes, there was. There was this elderly grandmother that the person knew of. He contacted her and said, there's someone in America who's looking for information. Would you be willing to talk? And she had a grandson who spoke good English and had, been an exchange student. And so that's how that happened. So we were in touch with this person, and just apart from that, we decided we would spend 2 weeks and go take vacation in Finland. And so we planned to go to all these different places in Finland, and we were going to spend like 2 days in this little village where they were from. Well, it turned out that when we told the grandson we were going to do that, he said, oh my gosh, that's great, because the ancient church is closed now. They've got a newer one, but once a year they have a festival there. And the whole family is going to be there on the same day that you were planning to be there, unknowing that this was happening.
Now, were these the cousins that came a few years ago when we had them on the show?
We have a show. Yes, we do. And so we got there, and this time we had a family tree that spread. If you watch that show that we did a long time ago now, I mean, it was at least 6 feet that it spread with all of the research that Mike had made. Because some of those people, some of their relatives, they had come from different areas when they heard we were going to be there. They weren't quite sure whether they believed us or not. Was this some sort of a scam? And so by the time we finished and we showed them how we had put it all together, they've become our extended family now. Yeah. And we're very close with them. And that has turned out. But the key to it was the Institute of Migration and this knowledgeable person that Mike had gotten a hold of. He would have never been able to do this on his own. Yeah. So once again, don't be afraid to contact these resources and ask. Now, I'm beginning to, by this point, I have really learned a lot about genealogy. I have educated myself. I know what I need to do. And this time, I want to go to Poland because I've learned that my German ancestor actually lived in Posen, which was a Prussian-occupied part of Poland. And by the way, that I've talked about this before, the family thought they were from Munich, so I had found a birth record that showed that wasn't the case. So I was looking for someone in country who could speak English, Polish, and German.
German.
Because my ancestors were German. And so I found this person. I engaged him. We worked it out that he would spend the whole week with me to do the research, to go to the archives. Now, I could have just engaged him to do all that on his own. Would that have been the same experience? No. Not in the least. This way, he went with me to the archives. He knew how to, on the index, he showed me how we could index to find the time frame we were looking for, and there were surnames. So, or at least there were alphabetical indexes where I could look to find my surname.
And it's just not as much fun to have somebody else do it.
No.
If you're a real genealogist, you want to be in there and you want to touch the papers your ancestors touched and that kind of thing.
Plus, I wanted to see where they lived. I wanted to see if I could actually walk that ground where they lived. And in order to do that, we needed to look at deed records and other things like that. And those things aren't going to be online, probably. Maybe someday they will, but certainly not then. So we looked at land records, immigration records, military records. His occupation was noted in some of the things that we found, so we got that. Immigration records. And that was great. Now, did I find the actual house where they lived? No. And I'm not even sure that it's still there, because this was this would have been part of this USSR.
With so much war and destruction and things over time, would be surprising, or not really surprising, that the house was destroyed somewhere along the way. It's
I don't know. And when we went to, the deed records did reference a land number, but he said, you know what, that's not going to be the same anymore. So then we tried to figure out where that might be, and then we were told, well, records are probably in Berlin. Yeah. Well, we weren't, that's another trip.
Yeah, because you can have street name changes. I dealt with this in some research I was doing where the street name was changed, and then they decided to make all of the house numbers uniform. So they put the odd numbers on the north side of the street and even numbers on the south side. So it took me quite a bit of work to finally narrow down, and the house was still there. But if I hadn't found an article in the newspaper telling about these street name changes and house number changes, I'd have never found it, because initially, before I knew about the street number changes, I thought it was an empty space between two houses where it fell in. So those kinds of things are all going to be things that we may or may not find.
Yeah. Well, now, my great-grandmother was from Posen as well, but a different area. And we went there, and that whole region where she lived became a forest. So I walked the forest. That's the best I was going to ever be able to do. But that was, to get started on that trip, I had given him every bit of the research that I had. And then that helped him begin to source where we might find more information. And that was really important. So if you're thinking about working with a researcher overseas, if you're thinking about going yourself, you gotta do the homework as much as you can.
And that's an important point too, is the sharing it with the person that's going to be helping you.
Yes.
I mean, over time I've had people want me to help them, but they're not willing to give me what they have. So I've got a starting point.
Yeah.
I had one person that I got so frustrated because everything I'd find, well, I already have that. Well, why didn't you share it with me? I'm taking the little bits that you're giving me, and this is how I'm progressing. And so eventually we kind of mutually agreed to fire each other.
Well, the last example I have is in France, and I wanted to use the Poland model. I wanted to hire a researcher and do the same thing, spend a week going through everything. Well, I didn't understand how records were kept there, and I didn't really understand that it was a different experience. So I started trying to find a researcher, and I got no response from the people. And the ones that I did would say, well, I've specialized in Paris, but I don't specialize. This region was not one of the big popular ones. It was just sort of kind of north of Bordeaux, that kind of area, called Ducèvre. And so I was getting nowhere, and I told you, Chuck, I said, I've got this trip that I'm planning to go to France, and I wanted to really spend some genealogy time there, and I can't get it to happen. And you said, I know
someone.
I know someone.
I mean, I knew this person had been to not just Paris, she had done research in France, had been there a number of times, and if she doesn't know how to help you, she might know someone because she had been over to France in different places, and so I shared that information.
You did, and I followed up, and wow, it just everything opened up. And by the way, this is a good lesson in join your local genealogical society, because there's going to be somebody there that may not be that person, but they'll know somebody. And so the best advice was join find the genealogical society and join it. Now, one of the things that this person knew that I didn't was that in France, all of the records are kind of in one place, and there are tons of them. Unlike other countries where, they're scattershot or they got lost during the wars or whatever, these records are really plentiful, but they're all in one place. And there are genealogy societies who love to do this kind of thing. And so actually, she helped me by sending something, and she translated it so that it was in French, and sent my request. And the next thing you know, when are you coming? How long are you staying? Give us, and of course I sent them a summary of what I was looking for, what I knew, and I knew who my immigrant was. I knew when they came, and I had the ship's register information. So I had that much. And of course, whatever I knew about what they were doing in Texas at the time really wasn't relevant. So it was just the immigrant really, but and how they came. And they took it from there. And the archives in Ducèvre was fabulous. And the genealogy group basically operated right there with the archives. And so now I have, because I only wound up with 2 days there, I walked back, got home with a whole book of information about who all those surnames are that are all part of this huge family that I have that are French ancestors. Now I have a lot to work with. One of my questions was, why in the world did they go to Texas? And because people usually travel with each other, the families travel together or neighbors, and I didn't ever find any surnames that looked like they were in Houston. Well, it turns out now that I have all these surnames that the genealogy group helped me to find, now I have lots to begin to work with in the census to see if those names are there. And I just want to solve that question of what caused them to travel to Wild West Texas in the 1840s.
Yeah, I mean, understandable. They came to a big city like my Scottish ancestors coming to Philadelphia. But, Texas was kind of, like you say, the Wild West.
Well, it was the Republic of Texas. It wasn't even America yet. I would say just a couple of things if you're interested in French genealogy. There are a couple of websites, there are a couple of data sites. One is called Filea, FILEA.com, and now that's been bought by MyHeritage. So if you have a MyHeritage subscription, you are going to see that they have a lot more French records now than they did. But access both of those sites, because sometimes the algorithms are different, and so you may find it on one and not on the other. But that's a great resource. And also GeneNet, GeneAnet.com, and that's where I found a marriage certificate. And the marriage certificate was so informative, and it gave the names of the parents of the two people who were married and where they lived. It was more than any vital record that we have in the U.S. So that was really useful. So that has been recently acquired by Ancestry. But you can't access it, at least the best of my knowledge, you can't access it through Ancestry. It's a separate subscription, but it's still worth going. Also, francegenweb.org is another place to go. So, if you're into French ancestry research, those are some sites that can help you.
Well, and Janell, the time has flown by,
Oh my gosh.
but I think this is important for our viewers to understand. The more you plan, the better prepared you are. Hopefully, the more successful you may be. All the preparation in the world is not going to help if the records aren't there, but if they're there, the better prepared you are, the more success you will have.
And I think you should know that the people in those archives, and like in that genealogy organization, they were more than happy to help, because they were excited that I was interested in it. And so, don't hesitate to ask and be tenacious about it.
Well, thank you for sharing this with us.
Thank you.
I still want to go back to Scotland to find my ancestors.
Well, you'll probably be more successul today than you would have been back when before you started all your genealogy education.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Well, thank you, Chuck. I've enjoyed it.